This is a celebration of Women's History Month. The Women and Gender Studies programs presents Voces Latinx. It's a showcase of student and faculty creative endeavors with the co-sponsorship of the Puerto Rico Research Hub, the Burnett Honors College, the English Department, the Philosophy Department, and the Humanities and Cultural Studies program. Featuring our very own Wanda Raimundi-Ortiz, Nessette Falu, and the crafts of Sonia Arellano, with MC as moderator. That will be me. Let me introduce our panelists today. We will also follow the same order of presentation. Please allow all panelists to finish for questions. We welcome your questions under chat. Sonia Arellano will discuss her forthcoming research publication, a quilt that documents how migrant women experience state-sanctioned sexual violence when crossing Mexico and traveling towards the US. The purpose of her quilted research is to demonstrate a feminist, qualitative research method that she calls quilting as method. Dr. Arellano is also my colleague at the Writing and Rhetoric Department at UCF. Welcome. Nessette Falu will discuss abolition medicine, a strategy to address the control of sexual and reproductive Black and brown bodies. She will draw from her book about Brazilian Black lesbians' prejudiced experiences with gynecologists and the ways they chart worth making in both those places and beyond, as well as her current project about sexual misconduct with gynecologists in the US. Dr. Falu is an assistant professor of anthropology and a faculty affiliate of the Women and Gender Studies program. Welcome. And last but never least, Wanda Raimundi-Ortiz latest work on Afro-Latinx identity addresses with hair and expression. Previously, Raimundi-Ortiz created Exodus Pilgrimage, a performance honoring those who survived and those that perished due to Hurricane Maria. Wig Variants writes about Raimundi's newest work. Nature will always find a way to survive, contoured, disfigured, graphed, and bulged. Raimundi-Ortiz's new work reflects her long interest in hair and social politics, tangled with class, Latinidad, and urban futurism. Simultaneously, through painting, photography, and drawing, Raimundi-Ortiz reflects on the beautiful accidents that occur in both my constructions and the nature that they mimic. Like nature, the work can no longer be contained. Professor Raimundi-Ortiz is an associate professor in the School of Visual Art and Design and a faculty affiliate with the Women's and Gender Studies program. Please help me welcome our first panelist, Sonia Arellano.
Hello, everyone. First, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. It is such an honor to be on this panel with my dear friends and colleagues. I just can't tell you enough how much I appreciate it. And then I also want to mention that I double booked myself, so I'm sorry to everyone that I will have to go after my presentation, so I will not be around for questions, but you're welcome to email me any or put them in the chat anyway. And I also dropped both of my presentations, the visual and the written part, in the chat in case you want to follow along with that. So I first want to start my presentation with a content warning. I'll be discussing sexual violence of women. Although I do not show visual details, some verbal details may be triggering for people. So my presentation will be about 12 minutes. So if you, I'm not offended if you want to maybe mute it or step out for a bit and come back. I also want to note that the term women here refers to all women, not just cis women, as you'll see from the story of a trans woman presented here. So I will go ahead and share my screen. I practiced this yesterday, so let's hope it goes smoothly. Oh, wrong thing. There we go. Okay, can everyone see this okay? Wonderful. So as a faculty member in the Department of Writing and Rhetoric, many people wonder why I study and create textiles. Not only do they have a rich history of facilitating social change, but also we can learn a lot about composing processes when making textiles. So today I will discuss a quilt I made to demonstrate what I call quilting as method. This quilt documents the state-sanctioned sexual violence experienced by women migrating through Mexico to the US. And it will be published this summer as a research quilt in College Composition and Communication, which is the first time a textile like this will be published in this journal. Usually it publishes articles. So I present the quilt here as an example of the product of what I call quilting as method, a feminist qualitative research method. I won't get into that today, but I do have another article coming out that explains more about that. So the quilt is the published research piece. This written and now voiced explanation should be considered a supplemental text, akin to an artist statement or a footnote for the actual research project, which is the quilt. The panels of the quilt are mostly based on Oscar Martinez's book, The Beast, which chronicles the long journey migrants make from Central America to the United States and addresses some of the context that creates conditions for migrant women to be violated. Often women are alone in their home countries because male family members either migrated north, were murdered, or abandoned their families, which means that when women migrate north, they often travel alone or with children. Many smugglers, bandits, brothel owners, and law enforcement that women migrants encounter are men who take advantage of women traveling alone by charging them more to cross, robbing and raping them, kidnapping them for ransom, coercing them into sex work, and negotiating sex to avoid legal ramifications, or raping them while in law enforcement custody. As Martinez states about women migrants, I think I'm a little behind on my okay, yes, okay. No, this is not the right order. Here we go. Sorry about that. As Martinez states about women migrants, quote, what many of them won't tell you is that they knew they'd be raped on this journey, that they feel it's a sort of tax that must be paid, end quote. Although current and accurate statistics are difficult to come by for similar reasons that women in general don't report sexual assault, the individual documented stories of sexual assault in interviews, books, and formal complaints are enough to understand the violent and unconscionable ways that migrant women are violated on their journey. This quilt documents 5 specific instances. So I've significantly revised this quilt since its first draft, but the argument has remained the same. The violence that migrant women experience on their journey to the US is state-sanctioned because the US and Mexican governments know about the violence, facilitate and participate in the violence, and do nothing to stop the violence. The top and bottom center panels are the US and Mexican flags, symbolizing the journey from one country to another and the experiences of migrants placed in between. Recognizing the culpability of the US and Mexican governments, both flags say in their respective languages, what are you doing, or ¿qué estás haciendo?, demanding the countries answer this question. The center panel is a map of Mexico, as this is the main location where the violence occurs. I chose purple because it has been used worldwide in marches, movements, and protests against femicide and gender-based violence. Also, I wanted to provide some contrast in color with the dark and natural tones prominent throughout the quilt. The US, Belize, and Guatemala are in an iridescent light purple, you can see there at the bottom, to represent the beautiful home country of a migrant's past and the idealized potential future in the US. So this panel takes place in Chiapas and documents the, quote, invisible slaves, referring to women who were coerced and or tricked to stay as sex workers at the Mexico-Guatemala border. This area on the border is also called the zone of tolerance because it tolerates prostitution along a string of small towns, but in actuality, the zone facilitates human trafficking. And you can see the map there is demonstrating those string of towns. 3 colorful buildings reflect the bars or brothels where exclusively Central American women work. I used such colorful fabric for the buildings to juxtapose their lively work environment with the dark nature of their individual stories. Additionally, I included their pseudonyms, as you can see here, and flags from their countries of origin to convey that although these are individual experiences, they represent the similar experiences of many. These women shared their life stories with Martinez, which made clear that these women experienced sexual violence long before they became sex workers, and they knew how to be strategic in their work, even though it wasn't a work they initially chose to engage in. This panel documents the violences experienced in La Arrocera, which translates to the rice cellar, an area where stories are told of, quote, women screaming while raped in those hills, end quote. This panel took strategic planning because it represents multiple experiences of very gruesome violence in an abstract manner. One instance is of a trans woman named Paola who escaped her captors because she told them to put on a condom because she had AIDS and strategically said, quote, I didn't expect this sort of problem. I thought you were all macho men, you know, the sort that only rape women, end quote. By questioning the masculinity of her captors, she shamed them into not raping her. Additionally, this panel documents the murder of a Guatemalan woman pregnant with twins whose dead body was published in a local newspaper, a picture of it. Quote, wide open eyes, a gaping mouth full of dried grass, dirt and leaves, and a bloodied scalp with fistfuls of hair torn out, end quote. While I could not capture the stories of Paola and the Guatemalan woman precisely, the outdoor scene depicted in the panel chronicles the way geography documents violences in La Arrocera. As he is shown around by the police officer in the area, Martinez recalls the gravity of being shown where people experience violences, stating, quote, we're walking among the dead. Life's value seems reduced, continuously dangled like bait on a fishing line. Killing, dying, raping, or being raped. The dimensions of these horrors are diminished to points of geography. Here on this rock, they rape. There on that bush, they kill, end quote. Again, attempting to convey these violent experiences of women along this particular area was difficult to express visually. I intended for the simple rock and the bush to reflect the unfathomable geography of violence in this area. This panel takes place in the state of Veracruz and documents violences that happen in an area called Coatzacoalcos. I probably didn't say that right, but it's the Nahua word for snake den. This panel provides a view of the train, also known as the Beast or La Bestia, that migrants ride on top of through Mexico, where many strategic robberies and kidnappings occur. This is another incredibly dangerous part of the journey because the prevalence of kidnappings often lead to rape and death, particularly for women. Martinez explains that the National Commission on Human Rights has met with various local and international government entities, and they claim they do not know about the kidnappings. Martinez says, quote, the unspoken question becomes evident. How is it possible that the kidnappings are still happening when the local governments, the countries of origin, the media, the Mexican government, and the US government all know exactly what's going on? Although the visual of the train is important in this one, it's hard to convey the many kidnappings. This panel takes place in the areas of Baja and Sonora, just south of California and Arizona, and reflects what is called the broad tree myth. So when migrants are nearing the border, bandits will rob and rape groups of migrants, and the guide will tell women not to resist. As Martinez states, quote, it's a desert tree literally draped with the bras and panties of migrant women who are raped by bandits along this border. Their underwear is kept as trophies. I refer to it as a myth, not because it doesn't exist, but because it's not one tree, but many. This panel reflects the border-wide, journey-long, and underreported occurrence of migrant women being sexually assaulted and raped. Planning for this panel was perhaps the easiest because the evocative image is clearly described in Martinez's book. The variation in underwear and bra style and color demonstrates the expansive instances of sexual assault. And I used a dark background to juxtapose the colorful or bright women's undergarments to demonstrate again how beautiful parts of women's lives can be turned into violent trauma on their journey. This panel was added in the revision process and caused a complete revision of organization of the quilt. As I was revising, news broke of a whistleblower nurse working at an immigrant detention center in Georgia who claimed that unnecessary hysterectomies were completed on migrant women and without consent. In the complaint, the nurse, Dawn Wooten, referenced the doctor working with Immigration and Customs Enforcement as the uterus collector. This phrase jolted me and reified the atrocities expressed in the complaint and other firsthand stories of migrants in accompanying reports and news stories. Considering the violation of vulnerability these women experienced, I decided to prominently cast the lettering and uterus in red, with the uterus on the background of a flowery, delicate fabric, as well as a printed, it's printed on fabric, printed copy of the complaint filed by Project South. I believe that the words of this complaint are important to read, and this panel shows the state-sanctioned violence that migrant women experience, that the violence they experience can last long after they arrive in the US. So you can kind of follow the trajectory of each of these panels throughout the journey of the migrants moving up through Mexico. So overall, my intent in fabric, color, and design choices was to juxtapose beauty and tragedy throughout each section. I did not want to present a story of only victims who have no agency, nor a story of romanticized resilience in a corrupt situation. Instead, I hope that I presented stories of the violence to hold US and Mexico accountable. This quote calls viewers, the people and governments of US and Mexico, to recognize how they are implicit in such violences against women migrants, and it demands they pay attention and advocate for change. This quote asks the viewer to visualize the migrant's journey, speaks to the material consequences of such violences, and provides a nonlinear, complex narrative. And the photography was done by Ben Jimenez, a graduate of UCF and former student. So that is my presentation. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arellano. Please, audience, use the chat to ask questions for a little later when all the presenters have done. And moving on to Dr. Falu, you have the floor. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you, MC, for that introduction and this invitation. It's not just even an honor. I'm completely pulled in by Sonia's work, particularly as that really, idea of difficulty of expressing visually violence and trauma, which there's so much of that in my work, which I will not be able to get into today. In the inexpressibility, right, of physical pain, but the kind of expressibility that's there about the social and emotional. We could do that through material culture. That's just really fabulous, powerful work. Thank you, Sonia. Okay. I will, excuse me, share screen. Oops. Not even prepared for you guys. Oh my God. Okay. Hold on. Let me get organized here. I'm so apologize. I'm still reeling off of Sonia's work there. Okay. Do this again. Okay. So I'm going to walk you through, introduce you a bit to my book project. And the title of today is Unseen Gynecological Trauma, Wellbeing, Erotic Power, Gynecological Trauma, Wellbeing, Erotic Power in Bahia, which is based on the full book manuscript that's on the final stages of University Press review right now. You know, anthropologists love to tell stories. We engage narratives. The question for me has been how we present engaged narratives, right? We see that in Sonia's work. The intimacy of sharing ourselves and the connecting to the subjective experiences of our research participants, who often become trusted allies, friends, colleagues, or for some anthropologists, such as Goya Becker, you know, lovers. And so I will introduce you to, I will read a bit from the manuscript, from the book. Really, it's one story, which is one of 3 characters for the film that I will kind of just think through here with you. And the notion of vivencia, which translates to experience, and how I theorize through women's own theorizations of their lives and their own Portuguese terms. And I will connect a bit of the research arc of the manuscript to how I'm translating ethnography into illustrative film. But I don't think I will have time to get much into the current project that I have my hands in the public work, but that too I'm thinking in these very same illustrative ways of expressing, right, the difficulty in the things that can only actually be represented in illustrative film animation and not in ordinary film documentary. Vivencia, experience. In a daily attempt, we try in crooked lines to find the exact meter, sustenance. What is right, I believe, is for us to succeed in our mistakes, be fortified through our weaknesses. With time, the armor acquired in battle is nothing but then a shield defense of ourselves, of our actions, hastily made. So, learning from experience will get struck on wisdom. This poem by Afro-Brazilian poet Claire Barbosa is the epigram of chapter 1 of my book manuscript, which centers Marcia as a main character. Let me introduce you to her. Quote, I will need to get my house in order after my grandmother dies, get my concurso, training for an exam, a full government job, completed, and start to viver minha sexualidade, live my sexuality. These were Marcia's anguished words to me during her 107-year-old grandmother's deteriorating final days. As we sat at our usual bakery for coffee and cheese and turkey sandwiches, hot sandwiches, Brazilian style, she explained that by viver minha sexualidade, she meant finding love or romance, doing her political work, and enjoying her friends. We would meet for coffee after her long day of paid work and community political organizing. And she would constantly return to those self-reflections, showing an intensifying anguish about her life. I would break the tension by teasingly asking her, and sex? And she would giggle fiercely and say, swaying her index finger, no, my love, not me right now. And she was adamant about staying single for a while and just dating. That too meant living her sexuality. And though Marcia was an out lesbian and very active in LGBTQ politics and activism, that did not seem to be enough to live her sexuality. All the while, I grappled with the question, how do we live our sexuality? And what that meant for Brazilian Black lesbians. I grappled with how living your sexuality is a much broader and subjective practice than finding romance and love, a partner, or sex. It means, among many things, to struggle, defend, survive, and be creative. And it means to expect and demand respect for our inner being as Black women and, in Marcia's case, as a Black lesbian virgin. I rearticulate the Portuguese notion of vivencia as more than experience in its literal definition. For Brazilian Black women and Black feminists, vivencias are the lived realities that encompass how their Black bodies experience freedom, survival, or violence, all three often intermingled. The notion of vivencia raises existential questions about how Black bodies exist, thrive, endure, and celebrate life, and how our belief systems are tied to that vision and outcome. To live well is to live our worth and worth making. Brazilian Black lesbians develop and deploy quotidian strategies of living to counter or even simply recognize, after all, there is also power in silence, the medical social experiences that reproduce gendered, sexualized, racialized, and class oppression. The expression viver minha sexualidade captures their struggles with societal norms, as well as the violence that attempt to restrict their sexual freedom as Black women. Politics of sexuality are always gendered and classed, and moreover, sexuality's coexistence with race inscriptions, here I'm thinking with Gloria Becker, makes it the utmost devalued locus of being by society. At times, Marcia felt a void in her life, which is captured by the way she described her erotic power. Only by finding a woman or two to amar, to love, to amar, to make love to enamorar, and enjoy companionship with, will she truly live her sexuality. But these self-expressions are also interpreted through their social conditions and ability to enact freedom. And as a result, their intimate relationship to their sexual subjectivities often spill into gynecological clinical spaces to forge their sense of self-worth, not just in how to be treated, but how to stay grounded in their worthiness through erotic power. On the day I interviewed Marcia, her emotions and reactions triggered by my questions about sexuality, race, and racism, being a Black lesbian or even a woman, were a lot for the both of us to contend with. Marcia had brought her pre-surgery abdominal, pelvic, and pelvic ultrasound reports to the interview for her hysterectomy performed just a year earlier for large multiple uterine fibroids, often referred to as benign uterus masses or myomas. And I was deeply moved. As a physician assistant at the time, I was trained to consider these documents private. And when she invited me to make copies for my research and began to explain how they fit into her story, I knew she wanted to be recognized not only as a Black lesbian, but as a patient and someone who had undergone a hysterectomy. I understood too that Marcia sought my medical insight for reading and understanding the severity and enormity of her myomas and for respecting the impact they had had on her life and health before surgery. Anemia, fatigue, heavy menstruation that felt like hemorrhaging, and a distorted abdomen that made her feel so uncomfortable and unattractive that she stopped dating and having sex. And second, and more important, she wanted me to know that virginity was central to her identity as a homosexual subject, deserving, appropriate in her words, acolhimento, welcoming by the gynecologist. Marcia had only slept with women and had never been vaginally penetrated for sexual pleasure, including fingers. And this is important when we think about that manual gynecological exams. For Marcia, now in her early 40s, and others like her in this research, being a virgin included sex broadly construed. And so in other words, she described her virginity as representing social and sexual lifestyles, not necessarily celibacy or intentional abstinence for religious purposes or waiting for marriage, normatively speaking. Virginity meant sexual autonomy and the capacity to define her erotic pleasure and practices in non-normative ways, such as not being sexually penetrated. So virginity becomes a social category of experiences and meaning about different expressions of erotic desire, corporal autonomy, and freedom, even pride in being intact. For Black queer women like Marcia, the integrity of being intact extends beyond the material body, but a sense of self, their dignity, their flesh. And they perceive that talking about their non-normative sexual practices is indeed taboo for gynecologists. But participants are right about self-identify nonetheless, in pursuit of honoring their fullest self, their needs and desires, and demands on how to exist in their bodies. Even if it meant, as in Marcia's case, not seeking care from a physician for 8 years while suffering from growing myomas until she found through private care a physician who honored her virginity by performing the pre-surgery tests and that bypassed vaginal penetration. And at last she felt welcome with respect and compassion. So these are some of the ways that I take up the high stakes of lived experiences, both within and beyond gynecological spaces for Black lesbians. And as in the book, the catalyst for the film is the depth of negative experiences in these spaces and the lack of accountability toward Brazilian white physicians who too often exhibit entitled behavior to abuse power and social privilege and rampantly target Black female bodies in dehumanizing ways. And so, for example, some of the narratives that shared with me are degrading language toward their sexuality and sexual practices, where one informant said the physician told her after self-identifying, "You lack sexual appetite for men, take this medication." Or dehumanization toward their bodies, being barely touched and notable apprehension, which is read as anti-Blackness. Or aggressive examinations are not heard. One informant said, "I jumped off the table and never returned for 10 years. She was brutal." And so this is an example, the jumping off the table will be one of the characters in the film. So the research arc, my analytical interventions fall under a larger research arc that I call an anthropology of worth and worth making, to argue that Black lesbians in Salvador, Bahia, a large urban city located in the northeast region of Brazil, enforce well-being up against intersectional intimate violence and gynecology, leading them to evaluate, protect, and chart their sense of worth within these spaces and draw upon their daily sense of worth making. And so the title of the book is Unseen Flesh, which is a conceptual framework using a Black queer feminist methodology I named Shadowbox in the Field to interpret the unseenness of worth and worth making within the quotidian, right? From a momentous sense of being across intersubjective communal strivings, and takes up these invisibilizing processes to understand the interstices of violence, and above all, situate the unseen value of Black lesbian life, both inside and outside of gynecological space. And so for the film, excuse me, this is, okay. For the film, I've actually already drafted my my narrative, the pitch, right, narrative for, I'm working with a MFA, a young Black man, Dana Barnes, who's an animator and illustrator, and with a Black queer woman producer who's a friend in New York City. And we're currently having conversations about what a trailer will look like for this. And this has been long-term interest in developing a film from fieldwork, which I brought down a film director to fieldwork in 2013 at the time, but have been sitting on that footage. But since then, I've recognized that there are many ways, such as this illustration here, which is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitutional, who have reported a lot about sexual abuse from physicians. But this illustration here, for example, right, there are many, they're subjective experiences, they're dynamics, they are power relations that a documentary cannot really capture, but that illustration and animation can. And so I'm interested in translating that kind of hiddenness of Brazilian Black queer women's hidden knowledge production, imaginations for a different world in gynecology, and the intensive labor, that embodied production of labor that grinds at the everyday and larger power structures. And so three characters would kind of circulate their own narratives, who know each other but share different social political spaces. The film would kind of rotate these three narratives and then converge them together to illustrate how prejudice ravels anti-Blackness and anti-lesbian and anti-queerness, and how prejudice is channeled through the aggressive examinations and interactions, and how, more importantly, to center how Black lesbians engage a sense of worth and acknowledge and protect their well-being through that kind of knowledge production that we can show in illustration. And one thing that I do in the book, which I will not be able to get into today, one of the conceptual frameworks under Unseen Flesh is gynotrauma, where where I look at the inexpressibility of physical pain in Lane Scarry's work, to show the expressibility of that kind of emotional and social pain through knowledge production. And one way in the film that I can convey that is the body scanning. And so in the manuscript, I dig a bit into what body scanning looks like, right? Being inside of the exam room, but the knowledge production that's coming in through social political praxis from the outside, communal care, and care of family, to contest, right, that ultimately serve to contest all institutional spaces, and in particularly in the gynecological spaces where there's such an intimate relation to the body and the mind and spirit. And for the second project, which looks at the extensive abuse of sexual abuse in the U.S., this is a global-wide issue, but in the U.S. in particular, 3,000 physicians have been allegedly over decades complained about, and many taken to court. With the largest case in California just a few years ago, impacting over 500 BIPOC women, but the thousands of BIPOC women, but 500 or more are coming out. And so again, the kind of illustrative work that can be done in film to, again, preserve the identity and the kind of visual, actual representation of women, but to really take the narratives and convey them and all of the power dynamics that can be instructive for the public, and also a kind of methodological tool, a visual tool for the kind of abolitionist medicine conversations that we need to open and rupture in institutions like medicine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Falu, for your presentation. It was really eye-opening. Could we continue with our last presenter, Professor Wanda Raimundi-Ortiz? Thank you.
I should probably unmute. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Santana, Dr. Arellano, Dr. Falu, AKA my girls, for this wonderful opportunity to be in conversation with our research. And I was scribbling notes while you were talking, and the thing that I found that was a concurrent thread through all of our research is this idea of to live and to live well, right? This idea that this is what I think what everyone wants, the simple desire, right? To live and to live well, and the lengths that people are going through and to try to achieve these goals, and the lengths that people will go to stop folks from living and living well. It's a simple thing, right? Like I tell my students, simple and easy are two different things. So, but I hope to be able to add to this conversation with my presentation. Wait, is this my PowerPoint? No, here's my PowerPoint. So this presentation, I call it Haciendo Trencitas, managing Afro-Latinidad through hair. And I don't have any hair anymore. I looked at Dr. Falu's hair and I miss my hair. I miss it so much. It's so beautiful. And so this morning when I was tightening up my presentation, I decided to, wait a minute, no me venga a decir, ahora digo yo. Okay. So let me just show you what I was thinking. Blackness in Caribbean culture is a prickly and complex subject. Through my current body of work, I'm focused on interrogating the politics of Blackness mitigated through hair. Me cago en nada. So I did a search this morning for pelo bueno and pelo malo, right? Good hair, bad hair. And surprisingly, pelo bueno showed this image. I took a screenshot and there's a bunch more. I was really, really surprised at the positivity and the notion of like good hair and Black women being front and center, right? So really what I was looking for was a picture of a woman in rolos, right? With these big old rolos to try to straighten and stretch the curl, right? Because the idea of pelo bueno is usually associated with silky, good hair. Do I need to do this full screen? Is it weird? Do I need to, I think, ¿verdad que sí? Como que, whatever. I don't want to waste any time. So I don't know about y'all. I have been the recipient on the end of these rolos and this monstrosity of having to sit to get my hair straightened, to have pelo bueno, especially as a fair skin Latina, right? What the hell? Okay. I'm sorry, y'all. I keep it 100. So I wrote this little thing here. We are only just recently witnessing a pro-natural hair movement throughout the Caribbean, which is very exciting to me. I'm sure that we've all heard the term pelo malo, pelo grifo, or my mother's personal favorite way of encouraging me to comb my hair, peínate se matojo, right? And so she would consider it like this kind of bramble of sorts. I have created this body of work as a response to my own sublimated trauma, the dreaded straightening practices, huge rollers, mirta de perales regimens, being whacked on the head with a hairbrush when reacting to my hair being untangled, hours spent under a helmet hair dryer, and the time-honored doobie, all in the efforts of having the coveted silky tresses that are the hallmark of pelo bueno. So I wanted to just show you briefly my earlier works, because my work has changed in the past 2 years. But I've known primarily as an interdisciplinary artist, mostly performance. And so the work I'm going to show right now briefly are the reinas. And so these are these performances that I have been working on since 2012, where I work through my trauma. And like the beginning of my slide presentation, I said the title is called Haciendo Trencitas. It's the idea of making braids. As you can see throughout my performance stills, hair features prominently in my performances. And my connection to my Afro-Latinidad is very, very, very strong. It's something that I do not shy from at all. And the doobie, so I show this not because I wanted to speak about the reinas, because the reinas is a whole different conversation about how I grapple and I use performance as a way to deal with trauma. But I was on a sabbatical to the 2019 academic year, and I had this desperate need for sanctuary. And in my time during sabbatical, I could not stop drawing hair, braids. Usually my work, I would have, feature, because I'm so concerned with erasure of Black stories and confronting anti-Blackness in Latinidad, and also the countering of African-American struggle with Latinos that don't understand their Blackness. That's a mouthful. I'm very, very much concerned with drawing representing Black women, Afro-Latinx women. And in my studio time, I just could not stop drawing braids. And I couldn't understand why I was so compelled to make these drawings when I was doing performance and all these other things. And for a myriad of reasons that I don't want to get into right now, about not wanting to perform, I just wanted to draw braids and braids and braids and braids and braids. And I'm talking about like a lot of drawings of braids, devoid of the person. I'm in my studio one day working on some linoleum cuts of braids. And I heard my mother in my ears all of a sudden saying, "Si te metes con un negro, aprende a hacer trencitas. If you get with a Black person, you better start learning how to make braids." And that rang in my ears, because I remember hearing this a lot, not just from my mother, but from people around me. This idea of managing Blackness and having to learn how to make braids because you have to deal with the Blackness, the bad part, the bad hair. And it just hit me. I had one of those, that movie, The Sixth Sense. I had a moment when I looked across my studio, and everything I did had braids, right? The hair featured prominently everywhere, right? You see the rolos, the hand gilded giant curlers, the different textures of that my hair would have to go through the different steps in order to have the silky hair, and the high cheekbones, the narrowed features, managing Blackness. And since I had that aha moment, I decided to only and specifically focus on hair. Because of the pandemic, because of my failed attempts at gardening, I know it doesn't sound weird for me to even bring that up, but my attempts at gardening saw me trying to force things to grow when they weren't supposed to, trying to stop nature from doing what it do. I thought that I would just throw some things in the ground. I came back from this residency with this vigor, this desire to buck the system and get in the ground and make and grow things without paying attention to the cycles of nature and its time. I thought, I live in Florida, I got a bunch of dirt in the backyard, I'm gonna throw some seeds and watch it grow, and I'm gonna live bountifully. What happened in my garden became a metaphor for what we were watching happening in our country. Black people demanding respect, white supremacy fearing its loss of a grip, huge power structures coming and exploding on contact, where there's just this huge force, and what we're watching was nature fighting. So I started thinking about the hair that I was making, the hair and drawings I'm making in my studio, thinking about how I no longer felt safe to do public performance because my work is so focused on pro-Blackness and interrogating anti-Blackness and worrying about being safe and coming home to raise my child. I started to think, what if my wigs started to mutate? What if my wigs didn't need me anymore?
Wanda, you have 5 more minutes.
You got it. And this is what happened. These are paintings of the sculptures. And the strange mutations that happened in the spray foam. All the materials that I'm using in the sculptures are what I would have normally used to create my wigs, but put under strange pressure. These became experiments for me to see what happens when things bulge, when they're trying to move, when they're trying to grow, when things are being constricted and demanding freedom. So this is what I've been up to. I have a bunch more in the studio right now. I'm working on some drawings. Like I said, nature cannot be contained and neither can the work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Raimundi-Ortiz. Listening to all your work has really moved me. Thank you for giving a place of honor to sexuality, to Latinidad, and to pain. I would like to open the floor if there's any questions or comments from the audience. I know that people have been chatting, saying beautiful, brilliant, amazing research for all of you. And it is amazing. It is the beginning of our Latinx voices. And I'm very honored to have all of you speak to us this morning. I had a question for Dr. Falu. The sexuality lived by Brazilian Black lesbians demand respect. When you mentioned gender and class, I was wondering about how they, gender and class, define and defend their own bodies.
Thank you, Dr. Santana. So how their gender and class defend their own bodies? Well, class doesn't, right? I mean, even this is the old argument, which class of race comes first. And in Brazil in particular, where racial democracy still is seated as this kind of colorblindness, right? And, you know, racial relations and identities are fluid. In fact, it doesn't matter what class, what kind of class what kind of class category or features, your profile you have, Blackness is not just seen first, it's read, right? And it's inscribed, and it's, and so the only association with class would be that if they're able to, which all of my main characters in the book are able to buy into private care, you may have better chance of getting a physician or finding someone who would respect and have some restraint with their social privilege and kind of obnoxious entitlement of how they respond to these identities and sharings. But many of the experiences are also in private care. So so then there's that. And gender, again, you know, gender is it's really the larger, compared to sexuality, the larger you know, entrenched form of oppression in Brazil. Through the physicians, the women physicians, for example, sexism in medicine is extremely just rampant. Not just you know, with patients, but across physicians, men and women, and so you know, that's a heavy frontier that many women experienced ideologically and institutionally, and also verbally. But then some of my interlocutors, the ones that I follow closely, are masculine identified. So you have masculine identified, masculine presenting, you know, identify as lesbian or Black. And so, so yeah, the heavy target. So I don't, the defense, I think that the defending comes through, which I do in the book, is the kind of community activism and social activism, and the other all kind of ways in which they understand these power relations, and every day already teaches them, right, how to defend, right, you know, their well-being by contesting in all kind of ways, from the micro behavior to kind of larger, you know, social action. So I think that's the
Thank you. I think you have a question for Professor Raimondi.
Yeah, I have a quick question, real quick comment. I mean, I just this is just amazing. I'm just, and I just, I mean, as a Puerto Rican myself, I just remember, well, I'm born in New York, but I lived with my grandparents in Puerto Rico for 5 years. I went there when I was 6, came back when I was 10. And I just remember, you know, kids, I didn't know how to speak English, and I had to Spanish, and I had to learn how to speak Spanish when I started first grade there. And I just remember kids calling me like, you know, pelo de alambre, you know, or, you know, that kind of stuff. This is a long time ago, right? But still, it kind of, I've learned so much about the kind of anti-Blackness that you experience, including even in the States. And I really appreciated the swing that you made, which was at first uncomfortable, the kind of managing of Blackness, which is what, right, the whiteness and Blackness in the Caribbean, that's what it teaches us, like a thing to manage, right? Pelo de alambre, we have to manage our Blackness and what it means to free that, right? You know, and sort of, and how it must happen precisely because of our racial relations, and incrementally, right? You know, and the unraveling of a braid to me is really powerful, even in that. So I just wanted to comment. That's not really a question.
Well, thank you so much. That means a lot to me, especially because of the conversation of, like, we are right now, we're witnessing this moment, right, where people are coming into their own, and still the frustration of watching Amara La Negra, you know, having her issue on camera with people telling her that if she looked less Black, right, if she straightened them, look like Beyonce, it would further her career, and people accusing her of blackfacing herself. It is so complicated. And I find that myself in the position that I am, both as a professor in the university, as a fair-skinned Latinx woman, who is very, 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 very proud of my Blackness, that I'm in this position that right now we can move the needle, but there was also a lot of resistance, right? And so the thing that I am hoping that I can maybe build, and I see that there's a question up in the chat. I think Mr. Colon is waiting to ask a question.
Yes.
Is understanding more, trying to build and build my research about the managing of hair in the Caribbean, and and how that becomes an extension of anti-Blackness. Well, it is an extension of anti-Blackness, but I want to get into the research of it, and I have connections to people that have started the very first Afrocentric beauty magazine. Remember Dr. Santana, the woman who came, Glenn, ay Dios mío, her name went out of my head, with the magazine Ethnica. Remember? So these are just one of the many things that I'd like to get into, because I know there's got to be some more concrete research on this that I can add it into and build it into the body of the visual work.
There absolutely is. Yeah, I'll give you, there are anthropologists, there are lots of people who've taken up hair in Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latinx, Afro-Latin American hair. Yeah, there.
We have a question from Ricolon. Take it away.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity here. Thanks for inviting all of us out here, and congratulations to all of you. This is great. I have a concern. This is for Dr. Falu. Concern because born and raised in New York, the Bronx, hard school, never, you're taught that professionals are professionals. I grew up with 5 sisters. I'm the only boy. And yeah, I've been a little bit treated better than my sisters. But anyway, that's a different topic, right? And I got 5 nieces, and I have my wife. And what you said about women going into these professions, into these doctors that we're supposed to trust, that we're told that, they're okay people, that they can do what they got to do, is concerning. What do you recommend that me as a husband, as an uncle, as a brother, or as a father do? Because in today, the way I was raised, and I say the Bronx because you're not supposed to speak bad about somebody who has a high level position such as a doctor. It's impossible. That a doctor can't do that. A doctor can't do no wrong. So when you say something like that, then actually you're the one that's wrong. You're making stuff up. Or in today's society, you're known as a cancel culture. So many people will stay quiet or say, you know what, I'm not going to say anything, whatever it is. I'll just switch my doctor or whatever. How do we help our wives, our nieces, our sisters? Do we go in there with them? Do we say, hey, let me just stand behind the curtain and you do what you got to do? And or what? What would you recommend? Because that's scary. That is scary.
Yeah, thank you. I know we don't have much time, and please email me. I'm happy to have a Zoom and just talk with you. But I will say, I'm doing public facing with this, and this is just a reminder, right, of the kind of public education that's needed. But I would just say quickly, the first thing that we have to do, and I'm speaking here as a clinician, both an anthropologist, we have to dispel and demystify that that medical authority or someone with a white coat, someone with a JD badge, lawyer, or whoever, even the professor, right? That's not they don't have the kind of power to secure our trust. No, that's earned, right? That's the first thing. And so you have to teach this in the same way that we teach our girls and boys to how they are in relation with each other, right? For sexual culture, it has to be among professionals. It's just the bottom line, right? Just because, in the same ways that unfortunately, there are predators in family, there are in the professions, in different professions. And it's the thing that we have to, but education and awareness, and it's just not circulating enough, right? This kind of media is not circulating enough and make it into people's homes. And so this is what I'm taking on, to kind of do the public work to do that.
Thank you. We have one more question from Cecilia Milanes.
Hi, good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I had some mic problems. Fascinating research, so powerful. Nessette, I had a question about the practice of OB/GYN appointments. In the United States, you know that a nurse must be in the room when the doctor is examining a woman. Is that true also in Brazil?
In Brazil, I don't, well, actually, that is a good question. I don't know where they are with that policy in the room, but I at the time I visited, at the time it was not, and my fieldwork really ended in 13, though I went back in 18, 17. But honestly, it is all in the U.S. It's not policy nationwide. In the U.S., we are only getting most states to comply to put that into place, including there is new legislature, very new in Florida, even having patients sign a consent for gynecological exam, explaining what that is. On the consent form, and that someone will be in the room. And so it is, but in Brazil, I would say that it has not been based on the research, but where they are today, I would still think not, but I can't confirm for you exactly. And if there is some sort of national mandate looking at consent, because sexual abuse is also pretty pervasive in Brazil, by physicians, that in Brazil, getting state legislature to follow a federal mandate is extremely hard, you know, and we know that from the history of domestic violence, federal mandate to get on the ground to kind of implement these policies. And so, yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you. I am so sad that we have run out of time because I think we need to be talking about this for maybe a semester. I want to invite all of you to be a guest speaker in my classes. But thank you to our panelists for giving their time to opening their research agenda with us. And we really appreciate what you have done for our community at UCF. Goodbye.